Alright, now we're gonna improve this search by synchronizing value of this input with query string parameter, so that anytime we would modify value of this input field, this value will be reflected in the query string, which will allow us to share this link, and when other users will open up this link, the search will be activated right away, because the state of the search will be restored from the query string parameter. So to grab the value of the query string parameter, we can reference route object right here, and then get access to particular query string parameter by referencing it directly on the query object. And to obtain this route object, we have to call composable function useRoute like this. And just because this search query parameter might not be defined, and that is why I'm gonna use ternary expression in here and check if this query parameter is not empty, we're gonna use this value, otherwise we're gonna fall back to an empty string. And just because our search query variable has to be a string, but the search field that we are referencing on the query object might be of a different type, we're gonna cast it explicitly to query string, like so. And now what we are expecting to see in the browser is that when we refresh the page, when having the search query parameter, the value of this parameter has to end up in the search query variable within playlists store. And as you can see, it works as expected. Whenever I modify this search parameter and refresh the page, the updated value of the search parameter will be stored in a search query variable of the store. But for now, the value that user enters in this input field is not in sync with the parameter of the query string. So let's get back to playlist filters component, and we're going to register watcher, which will allow us to track changes in a search query variable, and whenever we modify that variable, we're going to update query string parameter. As the first parameter, we're going to pass the closure, which will return the variable that we are about to watch for. And anytime when this variable will be modified, the watcher is going to call the closure that we're gonna pass as the second parameter. This closure is going to accept updated value of the search query variable as the first parameter. And within this closure, we're going to do route parameter modifications. And to do that, we firstly have to obtain router object. We can do so by calling composable function use router. And down here, I'm going to call method replace on the router object, which will let us modify some query string parameters. And in order to modify those parameters, I will basically pass an object with a key query. This is the key which stores all query string parameters. I will firstly check that search query variable exists and that it's not an empty string. Only in this case we're gonna synchronize search query with the parameter of the query string that is called search. So we'll basically replacing query string parameters objects with a new one, which will only contain search param with the value that user enters in the input field. Otherwise, when user does not enter anything in the input field, we're gonna fall back to an empty object, which will basically mean that we're gonna remove all params from the query string. Now let's watch the value of the search parameter in the query string, as I'm gonna be modifying search query. As you can see, the value of this param is updated in real time. And I would also like to completely remove this parameter from the query string on page refresh if this parameter will be empty, but currently this is not the case, as you can see. And that is because our watcher only gets triggered whenever we modify search query, but in this case, after page reload we haven't yet modified search query, and that is why watcher has not been triggered. So we have to make sure that this watcher gets triggered right away without having to wait until search query parameter will be modified, and that is why we can add another configuration object in here, as the third parameter watch function accepts configuration object, and in this case we're going to make this watcher to be immediate, which means it will be immediately called right after initialization, so that closure of this watcher will be triggered right away. And now if this search query string parameter will be empty, on initial page load, it will be completely stripped from the address bar, thanks to our watcher that gets triggered immediately. Let's also make one more improvement to this logic, and that is If I'm gonna leave a couple of white spaces at the beginning of this search query in the address bar and refresh the page, those spaces will be persisted in the search query. As you can see, they appear in this input field. I would like to change it and automatically remove those spaces. To remove those spaces from both sides of the search query param, we'll basically call method trim right here, right before we are saving value of the search query param to search query variable, so that our store will only contain search query without additional spaces at the beginning or the end of the query. Let's try one more time how this works. I'm gonna modify this search query param by adding a couple of spaces at the beginning and refresh the page. And this time, as you can see, those spaces have been stripped and they do not appear anymore in this search input field. And that's about it for this lesson. We'll continue in the next one, and link to the source code of this project will be as always in the video description.